The ruins of the royal city were silent, filled only with the sound of the wind, carrying the smell of smoke and burnt metal. Once it was a shining place of tall towers and silver roads, now it was a grave of ash and dust. Human Commander Elias Kane walked carefully through the broken streets, his boots crunching over shattered glass and bones. The war between humans and the alien empires had ended days ago, but he stayed behind to search for survivors. His armor was scratched, his helmet cracked, yet his eyes stayed sharp. He had seen many wars, but this one felt different. There was something heavy in the air, something that whispered of sorrow deeper than any battle he had fought. He passed a fallen statue, a woman with a crown, broken at the neck. Its eyes stared up to the red sky as if asking why the gods had turned away. Elias stopped when his scanner beeped softly. There was movement ahead, weak but alive. He raised his plasma rifle and followed the sound through the ruins, past the blackened gates and into the grand hall of what looked like a palace. The floor was cracked, the walls burned. Banners of silver and blue hung half-torn from the ceiling. Then a small cry echoed, a child's cry. Elias froze. His finger tightened on the trigger. He took a slow step forward, calling out, "This is Commander Elias of the United Human Fleet. Is anyone here?" There was no reply, only silence and the faint crackle of fire. Then he saw her, a tall alien woman stepping out from behind a fallen pillar. She held a small child close to her chest, her body trembling. Her silver skin was marked with bruises, and her once bright eyes looked dull and tired. The woman's gown, torn and dirty, still carried traces of royal embroidery. A broken crown hung from her head. Her child, a little girl, clutched a glowing pendant in her small hand. The light from it shone weakly in the dim hall. When she saw Elias, she gasped and fell to her knees. Her arms tightened around the child as she looked up at the human soldier. Her voice was weak, almost broken. "Please, don't hurt us," she whispered. "I am not your enemy." Elias lowered his rifle but stayed alert. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman hesitated, her lips trembling. "I am Princess Leora, of the Thalren Empire," she said softly. "And this is my daughter, Mira." She looked down at the child, who hid her face in her mother's arms. "Please, she is all I have left." Elias blinked in surprise. He had heard the name before. The Thalren were once a proud race, known for their power and wealth. But their empire had fallen in flames when their enemies, the Vorin, turned against them. If this woman was truly the princess, she was the last of her kind. Leora slowly placed the child on the floor and crawled closer. Her hands trembled as she touched the human's boots. "Please, take me as your concubine," she whispered. Only protect my daughter." The words struck Elias like lightning. He stepped back, shocked. "What did you say?" Leora lifted her head, tears running down her cheeks. "You humans won the war. You took our cities, our people, everything," she said. "I have nothing left to give but myself if it means my daughter will live. I will give you my body, my name, my life. Just let her live." Her voice broke at the last word. Mira began to cry softly, hiding her face. Elias stared at her in silence. He had seen slaves beg, soldiers surrender, even enemies curse him in their final breath. But he had never seen this. A mother ready to throw away her pride just to save her child. He knelt down and gently lifted her chin. His voice was calm but firm. "We don't take slaves," he said. "And we don't take concubines. Not anymore." Leora looked at him with confusion. "Then, why would you help me?" "Because it's right," Elias said simply. His eyes softened as he looked at the child. "No child deserves to die because of their bloodline." Leora's lips trembled again. She could not believe him. "No one helps without price," she whispered. "Not in this galaxy." Elias stood and offered her his hand. "Maybe humans are different," he said. She stared at his hand for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took it. Her fingers were cold and shaking when he pulled her to her feet. She looked at him as if she was seeing something impossible. Mercy. In the distance, thunder rumbled over the ruined city. Lightning flashed across the dark sky, and the human flag fluttered over the broken palace. For the first time in many years, the Princess of Thalren felt a strange thing inside her chest. A spark of hope, small but real. She looked at the human beside her and whispered, "Maybe this world is not all lost." Elias nodded quietly, his eyes on the sky. "No," he said, "it's just beginning." The cold morning light touched the broken palace walls, turning the dust into a soft glow. Elias had spent the night guarding the alien princess and her child. He had given them a small blanket from his emergency kit, while his soldiers stayed outside, unsure what to make of their strange guests when the sun rose. Princess Leora sat quietly beside her sleeping daughter. The little girl, Mira, still held the glowing pendant in her tiny hands. It was the only thing that had survived the fall of their empire. Every time she touched it, the pendant pulsed softly with a blue light. As if it remembered the power of her ancestors, Elias crouched near the fire he had built. Heating water for rations, he had removed his helmet, showing his tired but calm face. He looked human, strong jaw, kind eyes, gray at the edges of his hair. Leora watched him, cautious but curious. She had grown up hearing stories that humans were savages, conquerors, destroyers, but the man before her did not look cruel. Elias noticed her gaze. "You can eat," he said, offering her a small pack of food. "It's not royal food, but it will help you recover." Leora took the pack carefully, opening it with her long, delicate fingers. The smell was strange to her, but hunger left no room for pride. Mira woke and rubbed her eyes. Blinking at Elias, he smiled softly, and to his surprise, the child smiled back. "She's brave," Elias said quietly. Watching her, Leora nodded, her voice weak. "She has seen too much," she said. "When our home was attacked, she watched soldiers die in front of her. She hasn't spoken a word since then." Elias's chest tightened. He had seen too many children turned silent by war. "She doesn't need to talk yet," he said. Let her rest. For a while they sat in silence, only the sound of the wind and the crackling fire filling the room. Then Elias spoke again. "You said you were a princess," he said. "How did this happen to your people?" Leora's eyes grew distant. "The Thalren were once powerful," she said softly. "We had knowledge, technology, beauty, but we trusted the Vorin Empire. They said they would protect us instead. They came at night and burned our cities. They wanted our bloodline gone, because the royal blood carried something rare. It could connect to the ancient vaults hidden beneath our world." "Vaults?" Elias asked. "Old energy chambers," she said. "Power beyond understanding. My ancestors sealed them, fearing that greed would destroy us all. The Vorin wanted that power, and when I refused to give them the key, they killed everyone who stood by me." Her voice trembled as she looked down at her child. "Mira is the last one who carries that blood now." Elias understood. This was no ordinary refugee. This was the living key to something entire civilizations would kill for. "Then we can't stay here," he said firmly. "The Vorin will search until they find you." Leora looked afraid. "If you protect us, they'll kill you too." Elias gave a faint smile. "I've been hunted before," he said. "Humans don't run from tyrants, we fight them." She stared at him, trying to understand such words. "Why?" she whispered. "What do you gain from it?" Elias shrugged. "Maybe we just like doing what's right," he said simply. "That's what makes us human." For the first time, Leora's lips curved into a small, almost uncertain smile. "Where will you take us?" "There's a human outpost north of here," Elias replied. "Hidden in the mountains, secure and well defended. You'll be safe there." Leora hesitated. "You would take us with you? Even when your soldiers don't trust us?" Elias looked at her directly. "I decide who we trust," he said. "And I trust that you only want your daughter safe." Mira tugged softly on her mother's sleeve and reached her tiny hand toward Elias. He extended his finger and she grabbed it with a gentle grip. Her skin was warm, her small eyes bright like stars. "She likes you," Leora said quietly, surprised. Elias smiled. "That's a start." They left the palace at noon, walking through the streets of fallen marble and melted stone. Above them, the sky was gray and heavy. Human soldiers followed behind, watching the alien princess and her child with uneasy curiosity. One soldier whispered, "Sir, are you sure about this?" "She could be a spy." Elias didn't stop walking. "If she wanted me dead, she would have let me step on that mine I found under her floor," he said calmly. "We're taking them with us, that's an order." When they reached the edge of the ruins, Leora stopped and turned back. Her eyes lingered on the broken palace towers, once home to her people. "Goodbye," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My world is gone." Elias looked at her, then at the small child clinging to her gown. "Maybe," he said, "but your story isn't over yet." As they moved toward the cold mountains, the faint light of Mira's pendant glowed brighter. Unnoticed by them, somewhere far in the black sky, Vorin scanners detected that light and a signal pulsed through the void. Target found. Snow began to fall as the human convoy climbed the narrow path through the mountains. The vehicles moved slowly, their engines humming in the cold wind. Commander Elias sat in the lead transport, his eyes scanning the ridges above. He knew the Vorin could be tracking them, but he said nothing to worry Leora or the child. Princess Leora sat quietly beside him, wrapped in a human blanket that looked too rough for her royal skin. Her daughter Mira sat on her lap, sleepy but safe. It had been days since they left the ruins, and this was the first time the little girl had smiled. She watched the falling snow through the cracked window and whispered a small laugh. Soft like a bell, Elias noticed and smiled slightly. "First time seeing snow?" he asked. Leora nodded. "Our world had suns too bright for such cold things," she said softly. "It's beautiful." When they finally reached the human outpost, it stood like a fortress carved into the mountain. Tall steel walls, radar towers, and searchlights glowing through the storm. Human soldiers in heavy armor guarded the gates, raising their rifles as the convoy arrived. "Open it," Elias ordered through the radio. The gates slid open with a loud metallic hiss. The convoy entered the base, greeted by curious eyes and whispers. Soldiers looked at the alien woman and child, confused and cautious. Humans and Thalrin had never stood side by side before. Elias led Leora to the command shelter, a large structure with thick glass windows. Inside, warmth and light filled the room. A young medic came forward with blankets and food. "This is your temporary shelter," Elias said, pointing to a corner with 2 beds. "It's not much, but it's safe. No one will hurt you here." Leora looked around unsure. Her kind had once lived in palaces of crystal and gold. Now she stood in a metal bunker. But when Mira climbed onto the bed and started playing with the edge of the blanket, smiling, Leora felt something she hadn't felt in months: peace. Days passed, the base slowly returned to routine, and whispers about the alien princess spread through the soldiers. Some called her the Silver Queen, others the Ghost of Thalrin. Many didn't trust her, thinking she could be a spy, but Elias didn't care. He saw something different, something fragile yet strong. Leora spent her days helping the medics, using what little energy she had to heal the wounded. Her hands glowed faintly when she touched a soldier's chest, easing his pain. Her people once had healing abilities connected to the crystal cores of their world. The humans watched in awe. One evening, Elias entered the shelter and found Mira drawing shapes on the table with chalk. She looked up and smiled. "Papa Eli," she said suddenly. Elias froze. "Well, what did she call me?" Leora covered her mouth, surprised. "She hasn't spoken since the war," she said softly, tears filling her eyes. "She spoke to you." Elias knelt beside Mira, smiling gently. "That's a good name," he said quietly. "But I'm not your papa, little one." Mira tilted her head and whispered, "Safe." Leora turned away to hide her tears. Her child had not felt safe since their world burned. From that day, the mood in the base began to change. Soldiers started greeting Leora politely. Some left food at her door. Others smiled when Mira walked by, carrying a small stuffed toy someone had made for her. The walls of fear between human and alien began to fall. Piece by piece at night, when the base lights dimmed, Elias and Leora often sat outside near the small campfire, watching the stars. "You humans are strange," she said one evening, her tone calm. "You fight hard, but you also laugh so easily you destroy, yet you build again." Elias chuckled. "Maybe that's our curse," he said. "Or our gift." Leora looked at him seriously. "You could have left me to die," she said. "Why didn't you?" Elias poked the fire with a stick, the sparks flying upward. "Because I saw something in your eyes," he said slowly. "Not a queen or a prisoner, but a mother trying to save her child. No war should take that away." Leora's gaze softened. "In our world, kindness always has a price," she said. "But you ask for nothing." Elias looked up at the stars, his voice steady. "Maybe that's why we're different," he said. "Humans help not because of reward, but because someone must." Before she could reply, a sharp alarm echoed through the base. Red lights flashed across the walls, and the radio burst with static. "Commander, unknown ships entering orbit." Elias stood instantly, his calm gone. "Vorin," he muttered, grabbing his helmet. "They found us." Leora clutched Mira tightly, fear flashing in her eyes. The soft peace that had filled the mountain base shattered in a heartbeat. Elias turned to her, his tone urgent but calm. Stay inside the bunker, no matter what, I'll hold them off. Leora grabbed his arm, her voice shaking. They won't stop. They want my child. Elias looked back at her, his eyes fierce. Then they'll have to go through every human first. Outside, the snowstorm thickened, hiding the sky. The sound of thunder filled the air. But it wasn't thunder. It was the hum of descending ships, and the war was coming again. Straight to the gates of the human outpost. The storm came without warning. The mountains vanished under sheets of rain, and lightning tore across the sky like silver fire. Inside the human outpost, red alarms flashed and sirens screamed. The soldiers ran to their stations, shouting orders over the roar of thunder. Commander Elias Kane stood in the control tower, watching the radar screen fill with moving dots. Each one marked a Voran ship descending fast through the storm clouds. "They've found us," he muttered, gripping the edge of the table. "Sir?" "We sealed all gates," said Lieutenant Harper, her voice tense. "No signal is going out." "I checked the comms twice," Elias's jaw tightened. "Then how did they find this place?" Below, Princess Leora held Mira close inside the bunker. The child trembled as explosions echoed in the distance. The ground shook like an angry beast and the lights flickered again and again. Leora whispered soft words in her native tongue, trying to calm her. Then the door burst open. A soldier rushed in, unpaled, drenched in rain. "Princess!" "You must move to the lower tunnels. The commander says it's not safe up here." Leora nodded and followed him. Mira's hand tightened hers as they moved through the corridor. She noticed something strange. The soldier didn't wear a name patch on his armor, and his boots left muddy prints. Human boots never did, because every soldier cleaned them before entering the base. Her heart began to race. "Where are we going?" she asked carefully. "To safety," he said flatly. Not turning, Leora stopped, pulling Mira behind her. "You're not one of them," she whispered. The man froze, then turned, his face flickering. His disguise shimmered and broke, revealing the gray-skinned features of a Voran agent. His eyes glowed red in the dim light. "Very clever, Princess," he hissed. "Too bad it won't save you." Before he could draw his weapon, Leora lifted her hand. Her skin glowed blue, and a shockwave of light burst from her palm, throwing the spy against the wall. The air crackled with power. Mira screamed and covered her ears. The noise brought human soldiers running. They found the alien spy unconscious, smoke rising from his armor. Elias arrived seconds later, his eyes blazing. "Who let him in?" he demanded. One of the guards swallowed hard. We don't know, sir." The north gate opened for a few seconds before lockdown. Someone inside triggered it. Elias's face darkened. "We have a traitor," he said coldly. Outside, the storm worsened. Voran ships fired energy blasts that struck the mountainside, rocks tumbling down toward the base. Human anti-air guns roared in reply, lighting the night with fire. The whole sky became a battlefield. Elias ordered his soldiers to focus fire on the descending troop carriers. "Don't let them land," he shouted. "Protect the bunkers at all cost." Inside the tunnels, Leora tried to lead a group of civilians deeper underground. Her glowing hands lit the way, guiding them through the dark passageways. The noise above grew louder, metal crashing. Explosions shaking the ceiling, dust fell like rain. Suddenly, a child cried out, "The roof!" A huge crack split open above them, rubble falling everywhere. Leora pushed Mira out of the way just as a beam collapsed. Pinning her leg, pain shot through her body, but she bit her lip and said nothing. "Mother." Mira screamed, trying to lift the beam. Elias appeared then, covered in dust and mud. He ran toward them. "Hold on," he shouted. He grabbed the beam with both hands and pulled with all his strength, muscles straining. "Move now!" he yelled. Leora stumbled to her feet, limping but alive. "You came for us," she said, her voice trembling. Elias looked at her sharply. "I said I would," he replied. "Now move." They ran through the tunnels as fire lit the sky above. Behind them, Voran troops broke through the outer defenses, black-armored figures storming the gates. Human soldiers met them in brutal hand-to-hand combat, plasma blades flashing in the rain. At the command post, Lieutenant Harper screamed into the radio, "Commander, they've breached the east wall. We can't hold them." Elias's voice came through, rough but steady. "Then fall back to Sector 3, we'll regroup there." When he reached the surface again, the base was chaos, smoke rising from burning towers. Rain poured down so hard it blurred his visor. He saw Voran troops dragging wounded humans into the mud. Not today, he growled, raising his rifle. He fired burst after burst, cutting through the attackers until his weapon overheated. Leora joined him, using her power to create a shimmering barrier of light. Each blast that hit it bent away harmlessly. Her eyes glowed bright blue, lightning dancing around her fingers. Elias glanced at her. "Remind me to never make you angry," he said with a grin. Even in the madness, she managed a weak smile. "You already have," she replied, and threw another wave of energy that sent enemies flying. But even as they fought, Elias knew the truth. They were outnumbered. The Vorin would keep coming, wave after wave, until no one was left. Then he saw something, a hidden tunnel on his scanner. An escape route marked long ago but never used. "This way," he shouted, grabbing Leora's hand. "We'll regroup in the mountains." As they ran, Mira looked back one last time. The human base and their new home was burning, fire and rain mixing into a storm of red and silver. Elias carried Mira through the darkness, his voice low and steady. "We'll survive, I promise," he said. "Humans always do." Behind them, the mountain shook with the sound of war, and above, in the black sky, the Vorin fleet loomed like a shadow of death. The storm was far from over, it had only begun. The rain finally stopped by dawn. The mountain air was cold and heavy with the smell of smoke and burnt metal. The once proud human outpost now lay in ruins, blackened walls still glowing faintly from the night's battle. Ash fell like snow, covering the ground in a silent gray blanket. Elias lay on a broken stretcher inside a makeshift shelter, his armor torn and chest wrapped in bandages. A plasma blast had struck him during the evacuation. The medics had done all they could, but his body still shook from the pain. Despite that, his eyes remained open, alert. And stubbornly alive, Leora sat beside him, Mira sleeping in her lap. The little girl's pendant glowed faintly, its soft blue light dancing on Elias's face. He looked pale but calm. His breathing was slow but steady, and his hand rested loosely on his rifle even now. "You should rest," Leora said quietly. "Your wounds are deep." Elias gave a weak smile. "Rest later," he whispered. "First, I need to know how many made it out." 47 soldiers, Leora replied softly. "And a few civilians, they're afraid, but alive. We found food supplies in the lower tunnels. Enough for a few days." Elias nodded faintly. "That's better than I expected," he said, closing his eyes for a moment. Leora looked at him with a strange expression, something between anger and worry. "You risked everything for us," she said. "For me, for my daughter, why?" Elias opened one eye, his voice quiet but firm. "Because you and Mira matter," he said. "Because no one should have to beg for mercy to live." Leora shook her head, her voice trembling. "You could have left me behind. You could have saved your soldiers instead." He turned his head slowly to face her. "A commander protects everyone under his care," he said. "And now, that includes you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to deny the warmth those words brought, but she couldn't. Instead, she looked down at her daughter, brushing a strand of silver hair from her small face. Mira stirred in her sleep, whispering softly, "Papa Eli." Leora's eyes filled with tears. "She calls you that now?" she said, trying to smile through her pain. "She believes you're her protector." Elias chuckled weakly. "Then I guess I am," he said. "And I intend to keep that promise outside the cave." Soldiers repaired damaged weapons and set up portable shields. The humans were preparing for another attack. Everyone knew the Vorin would return. They had lost too many soldiers to retreat now. Later that day, when the wind grew quieter, Leora found Elias sitting outside on a rock, watching the rising sun. His bandages were still stained with blood, but he refused to rest. "The sun looks the same on every world," he said softly, "even after everything burns." "It still rises." Leora stood beside him, her arms crossed for warmth. "We used to believe the stars were eternal," she said. "But even stars die, Commander." He smiled faintly. "That's true," he said, "but humans build light again, even when the stars go dark." For a moment they stood together in silence, the wind brushing through their hair. In that quiet space, something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but understanding. When the others finished repairing the comms array, Elias gave orders to send a coded message to the nearest human fleet. "Tell them we found survivors," he said. "Tell them we're not giving up." That night, Leora sat near the campfire, telling the soldiers stories of her people, not of war, but of peace, of the gardens that once bloomed under the silver suns of Thalren, The soldiers listened quietly, their faces softening for the first time in days. Laughter returned to the camp. Mira danced around the fire, holding her glowing pendant, and even Elias smiled, watching her twirl like a small light in the darkness, but peace never lasted long. In the middle of the night, a human scout rushed in, gasping for breath. "Commander, you need to see this." Elias stood, wincing from his wound, and followed him to the ridge. What he saw made his blood run cold. Dozens of black shapes moving through the valley below. The Vorin were coming again, stronger than before. "How long until they reach us?" Elias asked. "Less than 2 hours," the scout said. "They're bringing ground tanks this time." Elias clenched his fists. "Then we make our stand here," he said. "No more running." Leora came up beside him, her face pale but fierce. "You can't fight them all." "Not in your condition," he turned to her, eyes blazing. "If I don't, they'll take you and Mira," he said. "And I made a promise I intend to keep." Leora stepped closer, placing her hand over his bandaged chest. Her touch glowed faintly, warmth spreading through his body. The pain began to fade, replaced by a strange calm. "Then let me fight with you," she said. "My power is still mine, and I owe it to every soul they've taken." Elias looked at her in surprise, then nodded slowly. "All right, princess," he said with a grin. "Let's make them regret coming here." As the sun rose again, the human survivors prepared their defenses. The sound of heavy engines echoed through the valley. The Vorin army was coming, but this time the humans were ready. Elias stood at the front line, rifle in one hand, the Thalren princess beside him, and the child sleeping safely behind the shield walls. In that moment, under the pale light of dawn, two worlds and once enemies stood together as one. And as the first shadow of the Vorin fleet darkened the horizon, Elias whispered to himself, "No matter what happens, she and the girl will live." That was his promise, a human's promise, and he intended to keep it until his last breath. The ground trembled before the humans even saw the ships. The morning sky, once golden with light, turned black as shadows spread across the mountains. The hum of engines rolled like thunder through the valley. The Vorin fleet had returned, larger, deadlier, and furious. Commander Elias Kane stood at the edge of the camp, his rifle slung across his shoulder. His armor was repaired but still bore the scars of battle. Around him, his soldiers worked fast, setting up energy shields, checking rifles and mounting pulse cannons on the ridge. From the cave entrance, Princess Leora watched the sky with cold eyes. Her silver hair glowed faintly in the rising sun. Mira stood beside her, holding her mother's hand tightly. The little girl's pendant shimmered like a heartbeat of light. As if sensing danger, "They're back," Elias said. Turning to her, his voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. Leora nodded slowly. "They won't stop this time," she whispered. "They've come for the child." "For what flows in her blood?" Elias looked down at Mira, who stared at the sky without fear. "Then they'll have to get through me first," he said, his tone steady as steel. The soldiers around him heard those words, and something stirred in their hearts. Fear faded, replaced by the fire of resolve. Humanity was famous for one thing across the stars. They never surrendered, not even when the universe told them to moments later. The first Vorin dropships broke through the clouds, black metal streaks cutting across the sky. Missiles followed, explosions flashing like suns. The mountain shook, rocks tumbling from the cliffs, but the humans held their ground. "Open fire," Elias shouted. The air filled with the roar of pulse cannons and plasma rifles. Blue beams ripped through the sky, striking the incoming ships. 2 Vorin transports exploded mid-air. Scattering debris like falling stars, the soldiers cheered. But their victory was short-lived. From above, a much larger vessel descended, a Vorin dreadship. Its engines burning crimson, its energy shield shimmered, deflecting the human fire as if it were dust. Then its cannons charged, lighting up the dark like a sunrise of death. "Get down," Elias shouted, pulling Leora and Mira behind a boulder as a blast tore through the ground. The shockwave threw several soldiers backward, smoke rising where they had stood. Leora's eyes burned with anger. "They destroy everything they touch," she said through clenched teeth. "I lost my world to them once. I won't lose this one too." She stood and raised her hands. Her palms glowed bright blue, energy swirling around her like a storm. The wind howled, lifting dust and sparks. Then a beam of pure light burst from her hands. Striking the dreadship's shield, it flickered. For a second. Just a second, but Elias saw it. "She can weaken it," he yelled into his comm. All cannons target the main ship. Fire when her light hits. The humans obeyed, waiting for the next flash. Leora closed her eyes, drawing energy from deep within her. From her bloodline. From her pain. From her love for her child. Her glow grew brighter. So bright it turned the whole mountain blue. Then she released it again. A blinding surge that cracked the enemy's shield open like glass. Now, Elias roared. Every gun fired at once. The blast from the human weapons struck the ship's core. And for the first time in history, a Voran dreadship fell to a human-made weapon. The explosion shook the entire valley, lighting up the clouds in a storm of fire and thunder. When the smoke cleared, the soldiers cheered wildly. "We did it!" one shouted. "We actually did it." Elias looked toward Leora, who had fallen to her knees, her body trembling. Her energy was drained, and her skin had turned pale. He rushed to her side, catching her before she collapsed. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentle. "You saved us," she tried to speak, but only managed to whisper. "No, not yet," she said. "They're not done." And she was right. Above them, more Voran ships were arriving. Dozens of them. The fleet wasn't defeated. It had only begun its assault. Elias turned toward the horizon, breathing heavily. "They brought their whole armada," he muttered. "We can't outgun that." Leora looked at him, her voice weak but clear. "Then we use what they fear most, one. What's that?" Elias asked. "Hope?" she said, smiling faintly, and pointed toward the mountain. "The vault's beneath us. The Thalren energy. It's here. This place was built over one of our ancient cores." Elias's eyes widened. "You mean there's power under this mountain?" "Yes," she said, "enough to destroy or to save. But it needs the royal blood to awaken it." He hesitated. "You're too weak." Leora shook her head. "Not me," she said softly, looking at Mira. "Her!" Elias stared at the little girl, who clutched her pendant tighter. The crystal around her neck was glowing brighter than ever, pulsing with energy that matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. "You can't mean—" "I can guide her," Leora said. "But we must reach the vault before the Voran land. It's our only chance." Elias looked at the sky again, where fire rained from the heavens. Then he nodded firmly. "All right," he said. "We move now." He lifted Mira onto his shoulders and handed Leora his rifle. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "No one touches you or her." As they ran toward the heart of the mountain, the earth shook again. The Voran fleet descended like a wall of darkness, ready to erase what little remained of hope. But the humans ran anyway, guided by a princess, protected by a soldier, and carrying a child who held the power of a fallen world. The final battle was not just for survival anymore. It was for redemption. For both humanity and the last of Thalren. And above the chaos, the little pendant shone like a small, defiant star, the last light of two worlds refusing to die. The tunnels beneath the mountain were old, older than any human structure. The walls glowed faintly with ancient blue lines that pulsed like veins. The air was warm and filled with the hum of energy that seemed alive. Commander Elias Kane led the way, his rifle in one hand and little Mira on his shoulder. Behind him walked Princess Leora, her strength fading but her eyes burning with purpose. "This is it," she whispered, her voice echoing softly. The heart of Thalren, the last core. Before them lay a massive crystal chamber. Its walls shimmered with flowing light. At the center floated a giant crystal sphere, surrounded by smaller fragments that moved in slow, graceful circles. It looked like a frozen sun. Breathing light into the darkness, Elias stared in awe. "So this is what they wanted," he said quietly. "Power beyond reason." Leora stepped forward, her bare feet touching the glowing floor. "No," she said softly. "Not power, balance. This core keeps worlds alive, but the Voran only saw it as a weapon." Suddenly, the ground shook violently. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the sound of approaching ships thundered above. The Voran fleet had begun bombarding the mountain. "They're trying to destroy it before we can use it." Elias shouted. Leora turned to him. "Then we must awaken it now," she said. "Mira, come here." The little girl looked frightened but obeyed, clutching her glowing pendant. The light from it matched the rhythm of the crystal core. Pulsing faster and faster, Leora knelt beside her daughter, placing both hands over the pendant. "Listen to me, my star," she said gently. "You have what I no longer do. You carry the pure light of our people. You must call the core, speak with your heart, and it will listen." Mira looked up at her mother, eyes wide. "Will it hurt?" she asked in a trembling voice. Leora smiled softly. brushing her cheek. No, my love, it will only remember. Elias crouched beside them. Whatever happens, I'm not leaving you, he said firmly. Above them, the explosions grew louder and the walls began to crack. The mountain groaned under the assault. Mira closed her eyes and held the pendant tightly. The blue light spread from her hands into the floor. The crystal chamber responded. Its walls began to glow brighter, the hum turning into a deep, beautiful tone that filled the air. The giant core started to spin, beams of light shooting out from it like rays of dawn. One of the beams hit the ceiling and burst through the rock above, piercing the clouds and the black sky beyond, far above. The Voran ship saw the light and hesitated. Their sensors flickered and failed. Their communication systems went silent. Elias looked up in amazement. What's happening? Leora's voice was soft but filled with power. She's awakening the Thalren memory. The will of our world, she said. The core remembers peace and it rejects those who bring war. The mountain shook once more. But this time the sound was different. It was alive. It was as if the earth itself was breathing outside. Human soldiers watched in awe as the sky turned from black to gold. The storm clouds vanished, replaced by a sea of blue light. The Voran fleet began to fall apart in the air, their weapons melting, their ships crumbling into dust. One by one they disintegrated, leaving only silence behind. Back in the chamber, Mira's light dimmed, and she collapsed into Elias's arms. Leora rushed forward, checking her pulse. She's alive, she whispered, relief flooding her eyes. Just exhausted. Elias looked around at the glowing walls. Did she do all this? Leora nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. Yes, she saved us all. She saved both our kinds. They carried Mira back toward the surface, and as they emerged from the tunnel, the world outside had changed. The sun rose through the mist, bathing the mountains in gold. The air was clean, the snow white again. The sky was free of smoke and fire. The remaining human soldiers gathered around, their weapons lowered, watching in silence. The war was over. Not by destruction, but by the courage of a child. Elias turned to Leora. You said this place gave balance, he said. I think it gave us more than that. It gave us a future. Leora looked at him, her silver eyes soft. You humans, you never stop surprising me, she said quietly. You came as conquerors, but you leave as saviors. Elias smiled faintly. We just learned from the best, he said. Glancing at her, Mira woke slowly and pointed at the sky. Look, Mama, she said weakly. The light came back. Leora hugged her tightly, whispering, Yes, my star. It came back because of you. As the morning sun climbed higher, the humans began to rebuild, not walls of war, but homes of peace. Leora and Mira stayed among them, no longer refugees but family, and every night, when the stars appeared over the mountain, Elias would look up and remember the promise he had made, to protect, to believe, and to never lose hope. The galaxy would remember the story, the tale of a soldier who refused to take a concubine but gained a family instead, a princess who lost her crown but found her humanity, and a child whose light ended a war in the end. When dawn touched both human and alien worlds, one truth remained clear. Compassion had done what power never could. A new day had begun. For two worlds that finally stood side by side beneath the same sun,